My first ever Hunger Games Life of video covered Haymitch Abernathy, which was based on the original 3 novels. With the new prequel book Sunrise on the Reaping though, a book that was seen through the eyes of Haymitch, it's time for an update. In this video, I'm going to analyze Haymitch's journey in the new book and really focus on how much this new information affects and changes our perspective of his life in the original trilogy. And there's a lot that we will now see differently, from his motive to fight back against the Capitol, to how interactions with certain characters are now perceived differently, and most of all, why he was the way he was. I'm going to cover all of that and more, which will finally give us the entire picture and the entire life of Haymitch Abernathy. Just to be clear, this video is based on the novels, not the films. There are a lot of differences between the two when it comes to the original series, and I'm sure when the Sunrise on the Reaping film comes out, there will again be many differences between the two mediums. So just keep that in mind while watching. I want to give a shout out to all of the amazing Hunger Game fan artists that have created magnificent art that I used in this video. Every one of them will be credited when their piece of art comes up in the bottom left corner so you know who made it. And I've linked all of their artwork down below. So show them some love because these talented artists deserve it. Now that I've said that, let's get into it. Haymitch was born into the Abernathy family, a family that had been known to rebel in years past. Haymitch lived in the poorest part of the poorest district, living in the seam of District 12. Like most in the seam, he had dark hair and gray eyes. This differs from the film, as Woody Harrelson, the actor that played Haymitch, had blonde hair and blue eyes. These were actually features that those in the merchant section of 12 had, which is the rich part of the district, so that's a big example of how the movie and book differ. Haymitch was born on July 4th, meaning that every year of his life, he had to witness the reaping for the Hunger Games. Haymitch's mother's name was Willa May, who owned a laundry business. Meanwhile, his father lived up to the family name, being somewhat of a troublemaker. Many thought he paid the price for this, because he died in a coal mining fire, which most believe was not an accident, but a punishment for rebelling. Either way, he not only left behind Haymitch and his wife Willa May, but his youngest son Sid as well, who Haymitch was close with. Haymitch almost had 2 younger sisters as well, but the 2 twin girls died in childbirth. With his father gone, Haymitch had to step up, and he made sure that his little brother and mother were set up for success. By the time Sunrise on the Reaping took place, his name was in contention for the Hunger Games 20 times, 4 times than it would have been had he not taken Tesserae, which provided more food and oil every year to keep his family going. His mother did not waste anything, and Haymitch often wore clothes that were made out of sacks of flowers that were handed out by the government. With one pair, across his butt, it spelled out the words, "Courtesy of the Capitol." Haymitch's best friends were Burdock Everdeen and Blair, who he had grown up with. Haymitch grew up with very little money, and as said, his mother was very conscious of not being wasteful. But Burdock's family, the Everdeens, had a bit more money, and they used it to buy dough clay, or Play-Doh, and as a child at the Everdeens, Haymitch would make animals and stars that he would take home. When Haymitch was 6, he greatly disliked a girl from the merchant section named Macy Lee Donner. She had given him the nickname Itchy Itchy Haymitchy, which caught on due to her being wealthy and popular, and following this, the other kids didn't go near him for 2 weeks. Growing up, Haymitch was always the fastest kid in the school, only being beaten by Woodbine Chance, who was 2 years older than him. Haymitch was there when a girl named Luella McCoy was born, and he witnessed her father hold her up to the window for all of the kids in the scene to see. Luella lived 3 houses down from Haymitch, and he immediately had a connection with her. When she was 5 and he was 8, she had a crush on him and called Haymitch her sweetheart. Though she grew out of this crush, Haymitch continued to call her sweetheart. When Haymitch was 10 years old, he had been nervous to sneak under the fence surrounding District 12, but Burdock convinced him to do so, and Haymitch was very happy he did, because this led to a meadow where he met Lenore Dove Baird. She raised geese in this meadow, and they were very protective of her because she was the first face they saw when they hatched. Haymitch became very good using knives, which was because of a game he played called Mumbledy Peg, which involved throwing knives at a target. He was nowhere close to being as good as his friend Blair though. One day, Haymitch, Lenore Dove, Blair, and Burdock found a Peacekeeper bicycle abandoned, which was a dream come true for them because bikes were very expensive. Haymitch had always been jealous of Macy Lee and her sister Mary Lee Donner, who rode their bikes around town. Now that he and his friends had a bike, they spent the next week learning to ride it. Eventually though, the bike disappeared and they assumed that the peacekeeper it belonged to took it back. Eventually, Haymitch's friendship with Lenore Dove became more, and they started dating. They adopted a phrase that the Covey used to express their love: "I love you like all fire." Lenore Dove was part of the Covey, a former nomad group who were known for their musical talent and somewhat rebellious streak, which Lenore Dove did not shy away from. Haymitch watched her be arrested at the age of 12 for singing rebellious songs, and she was also thought to have lit a fire under the reaping stage a few years later. Lenore Dove would often sing to Haymitch, serenading him with old songs from the Covey, including one song that was especially rebellious called "The Hanging Tree." One of the songs she would sing had the lyrics, "Nothing they can take from you was ever worth keeping." Haymitch always acknowledged that she was much smarter than him, but he learned a lot from her. He would oftentimes buy her books whenever they showed up for sale on the Hob. He got her one about chickens, which was great despite the fact that her thing was geese. He got another one that housed a map from long before the dark days, and the best one he ever got her was a volume full of poems. One day, all of District 12 was forced to watch a hanging, which greatly affected Lenore Dove. Following that, she and Haymitch went up to the mountains where they saw 2 rainbows in the sky. She cried because the world was so beautiful, but said they kept messing it up. Haymitch helped out with his mother's laundry business by bringing up fresh buckets of water from the cistern because the water from the house was not enough. The hike took him 2 hours and demonstrated how strong Haymitch really was. On top of that, he worked with a woman named Hattie, and he helped her brew and sell liquor to District 12 citizens as well as peacekeepers in 12. This too required a lot of grunt work that again showed how strong Haymitch was. Though his job revolved around alcohol, Haymitch himself never drank. One thing Hattie often said to him was never keep a fire smoldering because it would lead to being caught. She said, "Fire is catching." On Haymitch's 16th birthday, the reaping for the 50th Hunger Games took place. This was the second quarter Quell, and to celebrate this milestone, 4 children from each district would be chosen rather than the normal 2. This made it all the more likely that Haymitch would be reaped, especially because his name was in there 4 times more than it should have been. That morning, Haymitch put on his shorts made from the flour sack that read, "Courtesy of the Capitol" across his butt. His mother asked him to go to the cistern to get her extra water, but Haymitch promised he would do it after the reaping, hoping he could spend extra time with Lenore Dove. For his birthday, Hattie gave Haymitch a bottle of alcohol, but again, he had no interest in drinking it, instead thinking he would either trade it or give it to Lenore Dove's uncles to get on their good side. When Hattie let him finish work early, Haymitch went to see Lenore Dove, who was with the geese that she loved so much. For his birthday, she gave him a flint striker, which was welded into a snake hissing at the beak of a long-necked bird, and it was fastened into a necklace that he could wear. Later that day, Haymitch went to the sweet shop and got Lenore Dove's favorite candy, multicolored gumdrops. When it was time for the reaping, Haymitch was distressed to see Luella McCoy be chosen. Haymitch also saw Macy Donner be reaped, the girl he disliked since childhood. For the boys, Haymitch witnessed Wyatt Callow and Woodbine Chance be reaped. As said, Woodbine was the only boy who could run faster than Haymitch, but that speed did not save him when he tried to run away here, as he was shot in the head by a peacekeeper. When Lenore Dove got involved, Haymitch rushed in to protect her, only to get knocked out by a peacekeeper, and as punishment for interfering, he took Woodbine's place as the second boy tribute. When he was on stage, Lenore Dove mouthed the words, "I love you like all fire," and Haymitch mouthed back, "You too." Plutarch Evansby, a Capitol citizen, was tasked with filming District 12 to document the 50th Games. He allowed Haymitch to say goodbye to his family, but in a terrible way. He forced Willa Mae and Sid to film take after take of their tearful goodbye, something that Lenore Dove refused to do for the camera. Haymitch told his mother and brother that he loved them, and told Sid that he now had to step up, which he regretted saying later on because Sid was only 10 years old. He also gave Sid the gumdrops that he had bought for Lenore Dove and told him to give them to her. As Haymitch left for the Capitol, he took a look out of the train window and saw Lenore Dove up on a hill holding the gumdrops, and they were able to have a goodbye that was not filmed by the Capitol, meaning it belonged to them and them alone. As the train departed, Haymitch punched the window until his hand was bruised. While on the train, Haymitch immediately decided to team up with Luella McCoy, forming an alliance. When Plutarch told Haymitch and the other tributes that he had edited the reaping to make them look good, Haymitch decided to stay on Plutarch's good side, not really knowing what to make of him. When Plutarch brought out a birthday cake for him, which he planned to film, Haymitch refused it. On the train, Haymitch was baffled to see Mesa Lee talk back to Drusilla, the escort for District 12. And when Drusilla punished her, Mesa Lee took the beating like it was nothing. When they arrived in the capital, District 12 had the misfortune of being assigned the worst stylist, Magno Stift, who dressed them in coal miner costumes that had been used several years in a row now. The parade turned out to be a disaster. When a firework was thrown in front of the District 12 chariot, the horse went wild, leading to Haymitch and Luella being shot out. And Haymitch looked up to find Luella dead after being impaled by a spike on another district's chariot. Haymitch's response was to rebel, so he picked up her body, stole the District 1 chariot, and rode it right up to President Snow's mansion. He stared up at him, forcing Snow to see Luella's dead body. Snow merely laughed, and Haymitch thought to himself that one day, someone would knock him off his high horse. This stunt put Haymitch on the map, and as he left, many citizens in the crowd yelled after him, wanting to sponsor him. He responded by spitting in their face, which only made the crowd like him more. Haymitch, Mesa Lee, and Wyatt were introduced to their mentors Wyrus from District 3 and Mags from District 4, given that District 12 had no living victors to take on this role. Mags opened her arms to Haymitch, said she was so sorry about Luella, and all of the emotion Haymitch had been holding back spilled out of him as he cried in Mags' arms. Later on, Mags and Wyrus asked each of them what they wanted while in the arena, and Haymitch said that he wanted to die quickly so that his mother and brother wouldn't have to watch, and he immediately mentioned the weasel mutts that the Capitol had used in a previous Hunger Games. These weasels had been a constant fear of his. When it came time for training, Haymitch showed off his skills with a knife, hitting the target dead center every time. This reminded him of home and how he developed this skill playing Mumbledy-Peg with Blair. Haymitch began to form a bond between both Mesa Lee and Wyatt, and he was shocked at how grounded Mesa Lee was, helping the other tributes from other districts create the token they would take into the games. Between this and standing up to Drusilla on the train, Haymitch was very impressed by her. Haymitch was later hit in the ribs with a sledgehammer, which was the work of one of the careers. In the aftermath, a bunch of tributes picked up knives, and Haymitch along with the District 7 tribute Regina looked at each other, realizing that a good number of the tributes were armed and that they far outnumbered the peacekeepers. They decided not to do anything though, but agreed that they could have taken them. Plutarch Heavensby then showed up and asked Haymitch why he didn't attack then. Haymitch also met a boy named Amperd, a District 3 tribute, and he pointed Haymitch to his father Beatty Ladier, who was manning a training station. When Haymitch went over to him, Beatty told him how he was being punished by the Capitol for trying to sabotage their communication system. As punishment, they reaped his son Amperd and forced Beatty to mentor him. This made Haymitch realize that he was not the only tribute to be selected through a rigged reaping. After having discussions with both Beatty and Wyrus, Haymitch came to the realization that the arena he was going into was a machine that could be broken. Haymitch eventually joined an alliance that Amperd had started, the goal being to unite every tribute that wasn't a career to try and take them down with sheer numbers. Haymitch suggested that their group be called the Netty Newcomers, which was a phrase he learned from his father before he died. Later on, Haymitch showed compassion for the very weak District 6 tributes, including one named Welly, and they flocked to him almost as if he was their protector. When leaving the training facility, Haymitch was unexpectedly taken away from the other tributes, and Plutarch took him to his mansion. When faced with the finest alcohol Haymitch had ever seen, he still decided not to drink. While in the Heavensby library, Plutarch and Haymitch had an intellectual conversation about certain books, ideas, and philosophies, and Haymitch could only take part because of everything that Lenore Dove taught him. When going over one poem called The Raven, Plutarch said that it described a man who drank when discussing his first love, but Haymitch retorts saying that the important part was the man drinking to forget his lost love. Just then, the President Coriolanus Snow arrived, and he was terribly sick. When instructed to get milk from the fridge to help the president, Haymitch went to the fridge, got the milk, and downed the whole thing. Plutarch witnessed him do this, but he didn't say anything, instead blaming it on the servants. This behavior made Haymitch realize that Plutarch was even more unpredictable than he initially thought. When left alone with the president, Haymitch put together that Snow had poisoned somebody for, as Snow said, incompetence, and while doing so, he drank the poison himself to throw off suspicion. Afterwards, Haymitch was ordered to sit down with Snow and was forced to hand over the flint striker that Lenore Dove gave him. Snow noticed something that Haymitch had not initially seen, a message that read, "I love you like all fire, LD." Haymitch was then shocked about how much Snow knew about District 12 and the Covey, and it unnerved him. Coriolanus of course knew all of this because of his past with Lucy Gray Baird. The president then told Haymitch that he was doing him a favor by putting him in the arena, because girls from the Covey like Lenore Dove say that they love you, but in reality they do not, because their plans for the future do not include the men they say they love. Snow then gave Haymitch an ultimatum. He revealed that he had been listening to everything, including the fact that Haymitch did not want the Weasel Mutts to give him a slow death that his loved ones would be forced to watch. So he proposed that if Haymitch behaved well and not like a rebel, he would be rewarded with a quick death. But if he rebelled any further, his loved ones would be subjected to watching a vicious and painful ending to his life. Haymitch replied saying that it seems as though Snow got him, and Snow replied saying, "Snow lands on top." Snow only emphasized this even more when he brought in what looked like Luella. Her body was the same, but the person that resided in this carbon copy was not his Luella. Snow added to the ultimatum, saying that Haymitch would make the audience believe that this was the real Luella, or he would make do on his earlier threat. When Haymitch brought her back to the training facility, Mesa Lee, Wyatt, Mags, and Wyrus were shocked, and Haymitch told them that he could not bear to call her Luella, so instead he agreed to call her Lulu. Finding out that she had drugs pumped into her chest by a device and a microphone in her ear that heard every time somebody spoke into it, Haymitch felt nothing but pity for this girl, who we later found out was a kid from District 11. That night, Haymitch was pulled out of his room by Beatty, and Beatty asked him to help himself and Ampert blow up the arena, emphasizing on how the arena was a machine that could be broken. Haymitch agreed, then promised Beatty that he would not let Ampert suffer if it came to his death. Committing to this plan unfortunately meant that he would not be able to stay with the netty newcomers he had made an alliance with, which upset Haymitch, but he understood it was necessary. For Haymitch's private training session, he took an unorthodox approach, telling the game makers that though he joined the Netty Newcomers Alliance, he planned to turn on them and win the games, adding that the only thing holding him back from trying to become victor was Luella. This approach ended up getting him a score of 1, which he could not remember ever happening in his lifetime. On the bright side, after the game makers looked at the striker Lenore Dove gave him, they approved it to be his token to take into the arena, meaning he could bring something in that started a fire. This decision might have been swayed by the president himself though. When the time for the interviews arrived, they decided that Haymitch should come off as a charming, naughty rascal, trying to do some damage control from his previous stunt at the parade. Once again, however, their stylist Magno Stiff did not do right by them, this time not even showing up. Effie Trinket came to the rescue though, called in by her sister Proserpina, who was part of the prep team and who was being graded on how well she did for a class project. On their way out, Effie's makeup kit smashed to the ground, and Haymitch did not hesitate in helping her pick it up. Effie addressed him by name when thanking him for his help, and Haymitch thanked her for dressing them for their interviews. When Haymitch was up on stage, Caesar Flickerman asked what he thought about there being 100% more tributes than normal, and Haymitch replied saying, "I don't see that it makes much difference. They're still 100% as stupid as usual, so I figure the odds will roughly be the same." Haymitch then added that this was a shot at the careers, which made the audience laugh. After Haymitch said that he'd be able to protect the Netty newcomers, Flickerman brought up his scoring of 1, and Haymitch said that that's a badge of honor to him, because all it showed was that he had enough guts to piss the game makers off. He then made a woman in the crowd have a fit of gleeful excitement when he addressed her, and the crowd loved him. Haymitch then took a risk, bringing up the fact that he made liquor in District 12, and called out the peacekeepers in 12 who bought it from him. By the end, Haymitch got a standing ovation. As he walked off the stage, he winked at the lady he addressed earlier, which delighted her. Caesar Flickerman then said the words that put a bow on this whole performance. "This one's a real rascal, ladies and gentlemen, Haymitch Abernathy from District 12. Mags gave him a hug backstage, and Wyrus gave him a nod, saying he'd for sure gotten sponsors. Though this should have been the end of the night, Plutarch took the District 12 tributes to his mansion to give them a proper photo shoot that they did not get earlier. While there, Plutarch told Haymitch that despite appearances, freedom was not limited to the districts, and his misfortune did not give him the right to assume so. Plutarch then tried to gain Haymitch's trust by setting up a phone call with Lenore Dove. On the call, she told Haymitch that she'd been arrested for singing rebellious songs, her way of getting back at the Capitol for giving Haymitch a score of 1. She assured him though that they were letting her go the next day, thus forcing Haymitch to focus on himself and going into the arena. The two then had a touching exchange, as Haymitch told her that they would always be together and that he would meet her in the meadow. He then told her that he loved her like all fire and always would, and Lenore Dove said the same. She then added that she mates for life just like her geese, and that it would always be him and no one else forever. Following the call, Plutarch told Haymitch that he set this call up so that Haymitch would trust him. He told him that he knew about the plan to break the arena and gave him vital information, that the sun in the arena was synced to the real sun, meaning Haymitch would know which way was north, the direction Beatty told him to go. Plutarch then added that the mutts came out of berms of flowers, which gave a direct path to get down below the arena. Plutarch then looked directly at Haymitch and said that the country needed him to succeed. The next morning, when it was time to go into the arena, Haymitch opened his arms, and Mesa Lee, Wyatt, and even Lulu embraced in a hug, showing how close they had become. Then Effie Trinket pulled the striker Lenore Dove gave him over his shirt so it was visible, and she promised that she would do her best to give it to Lenore Dove should he die. The arena was so breathtaking that Haymitch lost focus, but a gray rabbit beneath him brought him back. When the game started, Haymitch trusted the information Plutarch gave him, grabbed a pack, a spear, and a knife, and ran north, refusing to look back, because if he did, he knew he would want to help the Nettie newcomers. While the arena was beautiful, Haymitch soon learned that the beauty was actually deadly, as a stream that he drank out of was poisonous. Once again though, a gray rabbit saved him. Seeing it die after it drank out of the stream, it alerted Haymitch to the danger. Luckily, the pack he had encased tablets that saved his life. When all the deaths from the bloodbath were announced, Haymitch found out that 18 tributes died in total, including 16 Nettie newcomers and only 2 careers. Among the dead was Wyatt, and his death hit Haymitch harder than he thought it would. Later on, Lulu found Haymitch, and he quickly realized that the game makers in her ear had instructed her to do so. Later on, Haymitch horrifyingly watched her start breathing heavily and saw blood come out of her ear. He decided that the only thing to do was to take her out of her misery and rip the Capitol device on her chest off. Haymitch then whispered in the ear, knowing that the game makers were listening, and said, "You did this to her. This is who you are, murderers." Just as he did with the real Luella, Haymitch picked her up and ran into the woods where the hovercraft could not get to her, but the game makers snuffed him out when they sent butterfly mutations after him. Haymitch was able to kill them using Lenore Dove's striker, burning them to death. He then followed where they came from, allowing him to find an opening to below the arena just as Plutarch had said. Ampert eventually found him, as he had been instructed to do so by his father. Haymitch, with the help of Ampert, went below the arena, and he successfully blew up the water tank. He just barely made it out, but when he got back up, Ampert was not there. To his horror, he found Ampert being ripped to shreds by squirrel mutations. Haymitch tried to save him, but it quickly became clear that they were locked in on Ampert's scent and his scent alone, meaning there was nothing Haymitch could do. When the squirrels left, all that was left of Ampert was a skeleton. Haymitch knew that Ampert died for a good cause though, as the arena went haywire thanks to him blowing up the tank. However, Haymitch became aghast when it fixed itself. Not only had he failed to destroy the arena, but he had failed to fulfill the promise he made to Beatty to give Ampert a quick, painless death. Haymitch was so upset that he began to cry, and later he bashed his head into a tree trunk until he started bleeding. At this point, he just wanted to die. Haymitch pulled himself together though, inspired by his new plan to blow up the arena's generator. However, when he got to the arena's edge where he thought it would be, he got trapped in hedges of holly. But once again, a gray rabbit saved him by leading him out. As soon as he escaped the hedge though, he was attacked by 3 careers. Haymitch drove a knife into the female District 4 girl's gut and drove an axe into one of the career boys' throats. But he was overpowered by the District 1 tribute Panache. He had Haymitch dead to rights. He was saved by Mesa Lee though, who had blown a poisonous dart into Panache's neck. After taking a moment to process what just happened, Haymitch came to the realization that he had just brutally killed 2 people, which disturbed him. He was now a killer. He and Mesa Lee teamed up, and they immediately had good rapport, Mesa Lee saying that they would split everything 50-50. They then had a curious moment where Haymitch said that he did not think she could kill him if it came down to it, and she said the same thing about him. In the end, they both realized that the other was right. The two grew closer, and Haymitch realized that Mesa Lee Donner went from someone he loathed, then grudgingly respected, and now actually loved. He loved her so much that the two of them decided they should be brother and sister, and they took a moment to hold hands. They later swore to each other, sealing it with a pinky promise that they would tear the Game Maker's scripts, tear down their celebrations, and set fire to Victor's village, being the worst victors in history and refusing to play their game. Haymitch then voiced the phrase he had heard from his father, "Don't let the Capitol paint your poster with your blood, paint your own poster." Haymitch and Mesa Lee went through a few trials together, including going through the hedge that Haymitch had been lost in earlier, leading to them getting attacked by vicious blood-sucking ladybugs before escaping. They also encountered a giant porcupine mutation that was going after 2 netty newcomers, both of whom they were unable to save. Afterwards, Haymitch and Mesa Lee sat in a patch of Katniss, foreshadowing what Haymitch's future would hold. Later, they encountered 4 careers, but while escaping, they were shocked to see 3 game makers in the arena having come from below. Mesa Lee and the careers killed them while Haymitch froze, and Mesa Lee was angry with him for not having her back. Haymitch became distraught, knowing that he let her down, and even questioned if he had become brainwashed by the Capitol. Mesa Lee eventually forgave him, and they went back to the hedge, this time using a blowtorch to get through. When they did, they found a cliff, and below, it was the generator for the arena, the very thing Haymitch wanted to destroy. When Haymitch said that he was going to stay there, Mesa Lee began to leave, saying that she didn't want it to come down to the 2 of them. A cannon went off soon after, and they both ran to each other, having a look of anguish on their faces, thinking that one of them had died. This really showed how much they truly cared for one another. Mesa Lee really did leave after that, and after she did, Haymitch kicked a rock off the cliff. To his surprise, it bounced right back up, landing right in his hand. This made Haymitch come to the conclusion that there was a force field protecting it. The game makers punished Haymitch for discovering this though, by sending bird mutations after Mesa Lee. And just like with Ampert, they were programmed to kill her and only her. Haymitch sat beside her, ensuring that she knew she would not die alone, but with family, with her brother. As she faded out, Mesa Lee wrapped her pinky around his, reminding him of the promise they had made to bring the Capitol down, and he nodded, confirming that he would. This was the last thing Mesa Lee saw before passing on. Haymitch was reduced to tears, mourning the loss of his sister. Haymitch's next move was to find Welly, one of the newcomers, and when he did, he took care of her. The next day though, Haymitch left her despite her begging him not to so he could find food for them. When he was alone, he received a parachute, and on the front of the package, it said, "Courtesy of the Capitol," the same thing the flour sack he wore set across his butt the day of the reaping. When he opened it, it contained a jug of milk, which was in the same pitcher Haymitch had seen in Plutarch's mansion the day he drank the milk President Snow needed. Haymitch came to the conclusion that this was a message from Snow saying that he knew what Haymitch had done. Based on what he had found out that day, he thought that this milk was poisoned. He snapped out of it though when he heard a cannon, and when he ran to Welly, he found the District 1 tribute Silka holding Welly's decapitated head. Haymitch threw himself into combat, axe on axe, and he felt the strength of the 31 newcomers behind him. He got hit right in the gut though, and he fell to the ground. But when he saw Welly's head, the anger in him allowed him to draw his knife and stab Silka's eye out of her socket. Haymitch ran, and he made it to the edge of the cliff. When Silka threw her axe at him, he collapsed to his knees at the perfect time, making the axe go over his head, hit the force field, and bounce back right into Silka's skull. Haymitch, guts hanging out, came through on his pinky promise with Mesa Lee. With objects he had collected throughout the games, along with the Flint Striker, he created a bomb and painted his own poster. With shouts and bullets raining down on him from game makers, he kissed the Flint Striker, saying goodbye to Lenore Dove, and threw the bomb down toward the generator. In what Haymitch thought were his last moments, he felt the Flint Striker against his chest. He was holding his guts in his hand, and he felt the boom of the bomb, and he knew he would die a happy death. However, this was not the end for Haymitch. He woke up in a glass enclosure, his body hooked up to loads of tubes, and his stomach stitched back together. He was then forced to watch one of the gray rabbits that had helped him in the arena be eaten by a snake. He passed out, and the next time he woke up, he was in the training apartment. On his chest was the same device Lulu had on her chest, and it was pumping drugs into his body. Haymitch was locked in there for days with no contact from anyone. All that there was to eat and drink was milk and bread, another message from President Snow. While there, Haymitch thought about what the games had turned him into. He went into the arena as a simple district piglet, and returned as the murderous beast they always suspected lay in wait. The TV turned on every once in a while, showing horrific sights of past Hunger Games. Then one day, it showed a girl that he quickly realized was the only other District 12 victor, and she was clearly from the Covey. He then saw a curly-haired man in the shadows, and Haymitch came to the shocking realization of why Snow knew so much about District 12, the Covey, and his relationship with Lenore Dove. Thinking of the fate he had given Lenore Dove, Haymitch began to smash up the apartment, but eventually Peacekeepers entered, followed by Effie Trinket. They got him ready for the victory celebration, but kept the device on his chest. Peacekeepers thought Haymitch was dangerous, but Effie stood by his side despite their warnings. When Haymitch told her that he would not hurt her, she said that she already knew that and had known what kind of person he was ever since he helped her pick up her spilled makeup box. Haymitch saw the first consequence of him rebelling. Mags was in a wheelchair, and Wyra seemed to have lost part of her mind due to her being tortured. Haymitch had no idea how he would be perceived by the capital citizens. He expected to be booed, but on the contrary, he got a standing ovation. He understood why when they played the highlights of the games. They had cut out his rebellious act during the parade, showed him being a rascal during his interview, but made it seem as though he had not been part of any alliance with the Nettie newcomers. They showed Haymitch running from the bloodbath as though he was saving himself. They didn't show him protecting any of his allies, including Ampert. They cut Haymitch being with Lulu when she died. They didn't show the arena going haywire following Haymitch trying to blow it up. They made his and Mesa Lee's relationship look less intimate, even making their parting of ways look cold. They also reworked how Haymitch found Welly, completely fabricating that Welly called out for Haymitch rather than Haymitch going looking for her. They also cut Haymitch receiving the milk, and they of course cut Haymitch throwing the bomb at the end, instead only showing him be lifted out of the arena. They had made Haymitch look like a selfish competitor who was in it to win, not caring about anybody else, and they made him look like a rascal rather than a rebel, manufacturing the story they wanted to tell. Haymitch had tried to paint his own poster, but in the end, the Capitol painted his poster for him. When Haymitch came face to face with President Snow to be crowned victor, he did not bow as many other victors did. He just stood there and said, "I guess Snow lands on top." And Snow responded saying, "Enjoy your homecoming." These words frightened Haymitch, worrying about his loved ones, so he played Snow's games. He was dragged from party to party in the capital for 10 straight days, and at each, he was displayed in a birdcage, happily mingled with capital citizens, and sadly emphasized on the Haymitch the capital had created for the public rather than who he really was. the only person that looked out for him during this time was Effie Trinket. When Haymitch saw Plutarch, he was told that they never actually released Lenore Dove as she had told him they would on the phone, and he realized that she had lied to him so he could focus on surviving in the arena. When it was time to return home to District 12, Haymitch finally got the device off his chest, but he immediately wished he could get more of the drugs, marking the beginning of a long-standing addiction that would plague his life. He had gone 16 years never getting intoxicated, even when he sold liquor, even when he was offered the finest liquor he would ever see. But now, he had become addicted to the numbness intoxication allowed him to feel, all thanks to President Snow. On the train, he once again got a message from the president as he was given milk and bread. Snow made his ride back even worse as he forced Haymitch to watch the coffins of his fellow District 12 tributes be hauled onto the train to go back with him. When Haymitch got off the train, he heard an explosion. He ran to see where it came from, and he horrifyingly saw his own home on fire with his mother and Sid trapped inside. Right when Haymitch was about to charge in to save them, Burdock and Blair pulled him back and held him down as Haymitch screamed out for his family. He begged his friends to let him go in so he could die alongside them, but they did not let go. Haymitch was given sleeping medicine, and when he woke up, he blamed himself for their deaths, just adding more people to the list of who he let die. Mesa Lee, Wyatt, Luella, Lulu, Welly, Ampert, all of the other newcomers he left to fend for themselves, and now, possibly the most painful, Sid and his mother. To make things worse, Haymitch discovered shortly after that Wyatt's father had hung himself. When the funeral arrived, it was not just for his mother and Sid, but for all those that died because of this Hunger Games. In the daze he was in, he thought he saw Mesa Lee and ran up to her, only to discover that it was her twin sister Marilee. Everyone gave the fallen a three-finger salute, and in that moment, Haymitch came to the conclusion that his family's death was no accident. It was arson planned by President Snow. He had to be sedated again, and when he woke up, Haymitch went to find Lenore Dove. When he found her in the meadow, they ran to each other, hugging and kissing. In her giddiness, she began to eat the gumdrops Sid had given her the day of the reaping. However, when Haymitch realized that these were not the rainbow ones he had bought, but blood red ones, he realized Snow had struck again. He told Lenore Dove to spit them out, but realizing she had already swallowed some, they looked at each other, understanding what was next. Haymitch screamed out for help, but as he held her in his arms, no help could bring her back. In her last words, she told Haymitch that she loved him like all fire, and made him promise that he would not let the sun rise on the reaping again. Haymitch kissed her cold lips and tasted poison, reminding him of who did this. This heartbreak destroyed Haymitch. He began to drive away anybody who could be considered dear to him, knowing that Snow would just take them from him too. The hardest people to let go were Burdock and Blair. Blair got the message after visiting Haymitch several times in his new home in Victor's village, and he gave him one final hug before leaving Haymitch alone for good. Burdock was more stubborn though. He and Astrid, who were now a couple, came over to check on him. But this ended when Haymitch threw a rock at them, hitting Astrid in the head and making blood drip down her face. A peacekeeper gave Haymitch an envelope of money every week, his Victor winnings, as well as a parcel of food. Every week though, the envelope showed that bread and milk had been deducted, something that Haymitch believed was another one of Snow's games. Haymitch numbed his pain with alcohol and sleep syrup. He had become addicted to the numbness of intoxication, introduced to him by the device Snow had put on his chest. Haymitch struggled mightily when trying to decide something, whether he should drown himself in alcohol to forget about Lenore Dove, or if he should do everything he could to remember her. This made the poem he and Plutarch went over become his reality. One morning when Haymitch woke up naked outside of his house, he decided to go looking for Lenore Dove's grave. He searched the woods until he came across Burdock out there. Burdock had not forgiven him, but he took pity on Haymitch, showing him the Covey graveyard. When he finally found Lenore Dove's grave, he sat there all day and listed all of the ways he had failed. He then buried with her the striker she had given him. Haymitch was haunted by dreams of feeding Lenore Dove gumdrops over and over again. He hit the bottle harder than ever and would wake up in forgotten places. One day, he woke up in an alley in 12, and on the wall, painted in orange letters, were the words, "No capital, no hanging tree." Realizing that this was written by his lost love, he remembered the promise he had made her to not let the sun rise on the reaping. His dreams plagued him though, and he not only had nightmares about Lenore Dove, but of the people he killed in the arena. Panache, Silka, and the other careers. This made him start sleeping with a knife in his hand, and he disliked sleeping when it was dark out, meaning he mostly slept during the day and drank all through the night. Haymitch did a terrible job of maintaining his health and maintaining his home, which reeked of liquor and vomit. When it was time for the victory tour, Effie Trinket arrived at his house. She took the knife out of his hand and said that she was sorry about his family's accident and Lenore Dove's appendicitis. This was yet another example of how the Capitol had used propaganda to alter the country's view of the rascal victor that was Haymitch Abernathy. They had changed how his loved ones had died. Effie bathed Haymitch before the prep team arrived, and she tried her best to keep him sober, but with so much alcohol on the train, this became impossible. While in District 11, Plutarch took Haymitch to an attic in one of the few places that was not bugged by the Capitol. There, Plutarch told Haymitch that the rebellion needed him to be a rallying point. Haymitch responded saying that he was the last person they wanted because he was an example that the Capitol always won. Haymitch later told Plutarch that he would not do it because he had nothing to live for, which Haymitch said without a note of self-pity in his voice. Plutarch responded though, saying that that meant he had nothing to lose. Haymitch came at Plutarch though, saying that he wasn't a good guy just because he was on the district side, and Plutarch told him that he knew that, but at least he was still in the game, which was something Haymitch could not say. Haymitch made it his full-time job to forget about Lenore Dove and all of those he lost, making his decision clear. Like in the poem, he did not want to remember them. He tried to forget their faces and their voices, and he blocked himself from the outside world, even ripping his phone out of the wall. The only thing he did was keep the TV on 24/7, always playing the Capitol News. This was his way of ensuring that if Lenore Dove's ghost came to visit him, he could tell her that he was still working on a plan to fulfill the promise he had made her. For 24 years though, Haymitch did not make do on this promise, nor did he even try. Katniss described this time of his life saying, "I think of Haymitch, unmarried, no family, blotting out the world with drink. He could have had his choice of any woman in the district, and he chose solitude. Not solitude, that was too peaceful. More like solitary confinement." Haymitch was forced to come into the public spotlight every year on his birthday though for the reaping. The citizens of Panem still loved him, falling for the Capitol's propaganda, which painted him as the lovable rascal. As Katniss said, he has been around so long, he's practically an old friend to some of them being the Capitol citizens. Following the 73rd Hunger Games, Haymitch had mentored 46 tributes and watched every single one of them die in the arena. This meant he remained the only living District 12 victor and the only person to live in District 12's Victor's Village. Katniss later notes that he's probably the reason that nobody from 12 has won since his victory, which is a valid assumption given that he was always too drunk to be able to get any sponsors for his mentees, and thus giving them no help while in the arena. While Effie supported Haymitch and even cared for him, eventually her patience wore out and their friendship had a steady decline. Deep down though, as she told him, she knew the person Haymitch really was. Haymitch made his way to the Hob in 12 pretty often, using his victor's winnings to buy more alcohol. Though Haymitch never interacted with anybody there, he occasionally saw his former friend Burdock in the Hob. When they were young, Haymitch had always told Burdock that he did not stand a chance with Astrid March because people from the seam never ended up with people from the merchant section. However, Burdock succeeded in getting the girl of his dreams, and together they had two girls, Katniss and Prim. When he saw Burdock in the Hob, he was often accompanied by his oldest daughter, Katniss. She wore braids in her hair, and when Haymitch looked at her with those braids, he saw his sweetheart, Luella McCoy, who wore her hair the same way. Burdock was later killed in a mining accident, and Haymitch then began seeing Katniss in the Hob by herself, selling the game she had killed in the woods. Haymitch watched some notable tributes go into the arena and win, including Finnick Odair, Joanna Mason, and Cashmere, all of whom President Snow threatened, using Haymitch as an example of what he would do to their loved ones if they did not comply with what he demanded of them. Haymitch mingled a fair amount with the other victors during his time as a mentor, and he got to know many of them. He likely grew closer with his former mentor Mags, and possibly Wyrus as well, despite her being in the state she was in. He might have seen Beetee as well, who we find out had a daughter following Ampert's death. One victor Haymitch actually mingled with a fair amount was Chaff, the two bonding over being drinking buddies. On Haymitch's 40th birthday, the reaping for the 74th Hunger Games arrived, and he treated it like any other Hunger Games. He got hammered, and when the mayor of 12 called him on stage, he drunkenly stumbled up and gave Effie an unwelcome hug. This shows just how far the dynamic of his and Effie's relationship has changed. Haymitch watched 2 more tributes be reaped that he would have to mentor, making them be numbers 47 and 48. The boy was Peeta Mellark, and the girl was Katniss Everdeen. Because of Sunrise on the Reaping, we now know why Katniss was different than the other tributes. She was the daughter of his former best friend, and a reminder of Luella McCoy. Thus, when he saw her on stage, he staggered over to her, put his arm around her, and said that he liked her. He then pointed at the camera and said, "More than you," possibly taunting the Capitol. He then fell off the stage, knocked himself unconscious, and he was whisked away on a stretcher. This taunting of the Capitol reflected that though Haymitch had lost himself, he was still trying to defy the Capitol, as both Lenore Dove and Mesa Lee had made him promise he would do. On the train, Effie refused to call Haymitch by his name, instead addressing him as Katniss and Peeta's mentor, adding that he had a lot to learn about presentation. Katniss noted that Effie acted as though Haymitch just had some rough manners that could be corrected with a few tips from her, which, drawing from the new novel, shows that she still felt as though she could help and fix Haymitch. Haymitch then staggered in, threw up all over the carpet, and fell in it, covering himself in his own puke. Katniss and Peeta helped him to his feet, and Peeta took him to his room to clean him up. The next day, Haymitch's only advice to his new tributes was to stay alive, and he laughed when he said this. When Peeta knocked Haymitch's drink out of his hand, Haymitch responded by punching Peeta in the jaw. Then, when Haymitch reached for his alcohol, Katniss drove her knife in between his hand and the bottle. When Katniss showed that she could throw a knife too, this got a reaction out of Haymitch, and he saw something in her. It also could have reminded him of playing Mumbledy-Peg back in the day with Blair. Haymitch agreed to stay sober enough to mentor them, as long as they did not interfere with his drinking. At the training center, Haymitch made well on his promise, and actually looked well put together, clean-shaven, and as sober as Katniss had ever seen him. After the parade, Haymitch commented that Katniss and Peeta holding hands was the perfect touch of rebellion. Taking what we know from the new book, his promise to Lenore Dove as well as Mesa Lee was appearing more than it had in 24 years, first addressing the camera and taunting the Capitol at the reaping, and now getting excited when his tributes committed an act of rebellion. Especially when you take into account that the parade was where he showed his first sign of rebellious behavior. Haymitch did a great job mentoring his tributes and actually gave them great advice. The thing that he harped on most though throughout the entire process was telling them to work in solidarity. And this is interesting because this most likely stems from how he and Mesa Lee worked together while they were in the arena. Or it could be sparked by how he and the Nettie newcomers teamed up. Haymitch and Effie also began to get along during the training, and Katniss noted that they were of one mind, illustrating the bond and closeness they once had. All of a sudden, it seemed as though the old Haymitch was beginning to reappear. When Haymitch questioned Katniss on how her private session went, something curious happened. He called Katniss sweetheart, which just slipped out. She had reminded him of Luella for years, and the thing he always called his sweetheart of old now manifested not just in his head, but through words. Then, when Katniss told him what she had done at her private session, shooting an arrow up at the game makers, Haymitch started laughing and said that it served them right, once again relishing in the rebellious behavior that was taking place right in front of him. One day, Peeta made a remark that Haymitch and Katniss were very much alike. At Peeta's request, Haymitch coached both Katniss and Peeta separately for their interviews. He and Katniss butted heads the whole time, which only proved what Peeta said, that they were so similar they couldn't stand one another. Meanwhile, he and Peeta came up with the idea of Peeta confessing his love for Katniss, which worked magnificently. It was the perfect way for Haymitch to be able to get them sponsors, even if Katniss was ticked off about it. On the day of the games, Haymitch gave them his last advice: get the hell out of there and don't go to the cornucopia. This advice could be heavily contributed to the memory of losing 16 of his netty newcomers during the bloodbath in the 50th games. He then finished off with the first advice he ever gave them: stay alive. Haymitch had clearly grown to care for these two, and he even used Lenore Dove's words to explain why in his head. I didn't want to let them in, her and Peeta, but the walls of a person's heart are not impregnable, not if they have ever known love. That's what Lenore Dove says anyway. Haymitch could only choose one tribute to help survive, and he chose Katniss. The reason he did this was because he knew Peeta was determined to keep Katniss alive, meaning between himself, Peeta, and Katniss herself trying to make it out, she had the best chance of winning. He gave her the supplies she needed when he could, showing that he successfully got himself together enough to mingle and persuade capital citizens to sponsor Katniss. Eventually though, he found out that both Katniss and Peeta could win. This led to him protecting both of them, and most of all, sending notes to Katniss to make her sell the Star-Crossed Lovers Act. Again, as quoted earlier, Peeta noted that Katniss and Haymitch were very much alike, and during these games, Katniss came to agree with this statement. They were able to communicate very well with sponsor gifts, almost having their own language. When they got down to the final few remaining tributes, Haymitch was pulled into some interviews to speak about Katniss and Peeta, something he had most likely never done before, seeing as none of his tributes ever made it this far. Overall, Haymitch was facing a disadvantage compared to most other mentors, because they all had at least one person beside them helping, while Haymitch was all alone. This made Katniss wonder how he was doing with his drinking with all of the added attention and stress. This was probably the most attention he had gotten since he won his own games. Katniss and Peeta had a discussion in the arena about how Haymitch won his games, and looking at their view of the 40-year-old Haymitch versus how the 16-year-old Haymitch was, it's an interesting contrast. They said he was not sturdily built, which we know he was, meaning that over the years he had lost a lot of muscle. They also said he was so surly that they couldn't imagine anyone would team up with him. This again shows how much he's changed over the last 24 years. He had an amazing bond with Mace Lee in the arena and was liked by most people. Finally, they came to the conclusion that the only way he could have won was by outsmarting everybody else. This was true on many levels, especially with the force field. This shows that though he lost his physical strength and likability, his intelligence was still present to those around him. Katniss then wondered if he was always a drunk, and wondered if he actually tried to help the early tributes he mentored. We now know that he had lost himself even before he went on his victory tour, meaning he likely did not. In the end, both Katniss and Peeta came out as victors after threatening to kill themselves with poisonous berries. Haymitch had finally succeeded as a mentor. He, along with Effie and Cinna, met Katniss when she was released, and though Katniss had a strong bond with Cinna, the person she ran to and hugged was Haymitch, and she did this with no hesitation. Haymitch then whispered in her ear, "Nice job, sweetheart," clearly embracing her and being reminded of Luella McCoy. The game makers wanted Katniss to be surgically altered for her reappearance following the games, but Haymitch refused to let them do this. He had a huge fight with them, ensuring that they did not alter her. However, that was nothing compared to the other things he had to protect her from. Before they went on stage for the final interviews, Haymitch hugged Katniss and whispered in her ear, telling her that the Capitol was angry with her for the stunt she pulled with the berries. He said that her only defense was that she did it because she was driven crazy by love, and to show that in this interview. When Haymitch was called on stage, it led to a round of stomping that went on for at least 5 minutes, showing he was still loved because of the Capitol's propaganda, even if everyone did see him fall off the stage while drunk at the reaping. Katniss and Peeta winning the games the way they did sparked and revived the promises Haymitch had made to Lenore Dove and Maceley. He joined a group that was rebelling, run by none other than Plutarch Heavensbee, the man that had come to him 24 years earlier, asking him to be the face of the rebellion. This time though, Plutarch told him that their goal was for Katniss to take on the role that Haymitch refused. This was an interesting contrast because, as stated, both Peeta and Katniss remarked how similar Haymitch and Katniss were to each other personality-wise. But their paths of life are also very similar. Both lost their fathers, neither was reaped in the traditional way, they both left behind a struggling mother and younger sibling, they both became allies with a fellow District 12 tribute of the opposite sex, they both won the games in a rebellious way, and now they were both offered the same role to be the face of the rebellion. Even with the spark the rebellion gave him though, Haymitch still fell into his old ways, drinking way too much and sleeping with a knife in his hand. He was now neighbors with Katniss and Peeta, who had moved into Victor's village with him, and Katniss often brought him liquor. For a week though, there was a shortage of alcohol, and Haymitch went through terrible withdrawal, during which he began to hallucinate and see things that weren't really there. We can speculate that these visions were possibly the reoccurring nightmares he had been having for years of feeding Lenore Dove gumdrops and murdering the tributes in the arena. When the victory tour arrived, Katniss tried to wake Haymitch up, but when he didn't awake, she threw a bucket of water on his head. An animal noise came out of Haymitch's mouth as he lashed at her with his knife. When Peeta arrived, seeing how stiff he and Katniss were, Haymitch told them that they had a lot of work to do to convince the country that they loved one another. Haymitch knew that Peeta really did love Katniss, but also knew that it was all an act for Miss Everdeen. On the train ride, Katniss took Haymitch outside to talk, deciding that he was the first person she wanted to confide in. She told him that Snow had visited her, and that he threatened her, saying that if she didn't convince the country that she loved Peeta, he would kill those closest to her. Haymitch's response to this is very telling. His face sobers, grows older in the glow of the red taillights. Then you can't fail. A reaction like this clearly indicates that he was thinking about how Snow threatened him and took his loved ones when he could not convince the country that he was a rascal rather than a rebel. He knew that Snow would make well on his promises. As they parted ways, Haymitch pat Katniss's shoulder and told her that she could do a lot worse than Peeta for a partner. When they were in District 11, Katniss went off script, and this led to a man being shot. Haymitch ordered Katniss and Peeta to come with him, and he led them through a maze of twisting staircases, narrow halls, and finally through a trap door to reach an attic. Katniss was shocked that Haymitch knew how to get here, considering he had probably only been here one other time during his victory tour. Haymitch knew about this attic because it was the same attic where Plutarch had taken him when he asked Haymitch to be the face of the rebellion. That is why he knew this place was not bugged. Here, Peeta told them to stop keeping him in the dark, so they told him about Snow's threat. Peeta then made Haymitch promise not to leave him in the dark anymore, which he agreed to. The three of them then decided that Katniss and Peeta should get engaged to help sell their love story, and they did this during their victory tour. When they were back in 12, Effie came to Haymitch's house and put the phone he had ripped off years ago back up on the wall. She also asked him if he wanted to give Katniss away at her wedding, and he replied saying the sooner the better. This little moment between Effie and Haymitch shows that the relationship they had earlier was starting to re-emerge. Haymitch interfered with Gale's whipping when Cray, the new head peacekeeper, whipped Katniss in the face. Haymitch yelled at him for this, saying she had a wedding dress photo shoot the next day. Haymitch then fearlessly threatened the head peacekeeper, and he won the standoff. Here, we see a glimpse of the rebellious Haymitch returning. When Haymitch, Katniss, and Peeta took a walk, Katniss said that she wanted to start an uprising, and Haymitch laughed, telling her that it would not work. Haymitch of course had to say this because he was working on a bigger plan with Plutarch and the rebellion, and this uprising Katniss was planning would spoil all of that. After having survived the second quarter Quell, President Snow announced that for the third quarter Quell, the tributes would be chosen from the existing pool of victors, meaning there was a chance that Haymitch was going back into the arena 25 years later. Peeta came to him immediately, begging Haymitch to let him go back into the arena so that he could protect Katniss in there, while Haymitch could protect her as a sponsor out here. After a long while, Katniss came to Haymitch as well, and he called her out for taking so long when compared to Peeta. Katniss actually drank with Haymitch, and she proposed that Haymitch go into the arena because he hated his life anyway, to which Haymitch replied saying, "Very true." They talked about how difficult that would be for Haymitch though, because he knew most of the victors he'd be going against, but Haymitch said that it would be difficult for him no matter where he was. Both of them then agreed that their plan was to save Peeta at whatever cost. Shortly after he spoke with them, Haymitch helped form a plan with the rebels. Before going into the arena, Districts 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 11, and with him 12, all teamed up with one another. This most likely took Haymitch back to his alliance with the Nettie newcomers, as multiple districts banded together to fight the careers, only this time, they were fighting the capital. The next day, Peeta dumped all of Haymitch's liquor down the drain, and he paid off the suppliers so they wouldn't give him any more. This led to Haymitch taking a swipe at Peeta with his knife, but he deflected it. Peeta then made the three of them start to train. They watched old Hunger Games highlights at night, and during the day they exercised, worked on combat, and taught each other their different skills. Haymitch turned out to still be remarkably strong, according to Katniss, but his endurance was awful, and his ability to throw a knife was gone. This was of course something he had been very skilled at when he was younger because of the game Mumbledy-Peg that he played with his friends. When it came time for the reaping, Haymitch's name was called, but before he even had a chance to give Katniss an unhappy look, Peeta volunteered in his place, meaning Haymitch was going to be a mentor again. During the reaping for the other districts, Haymitch watches, his face devoid of emotion, as friends of his step up to take the stage. Both of Haymitch's former mentors, Mags and Wyrus, were going back into the arena, and as was Beatty. His drinking buddy Chaff was also chosen, and Finnick Odair, Joanna Mason, and Kashmir were all reaped as well, all victors who had been shown Haymitch's punishment, forcing them to comply with what Snow wanted them to do. When the reaping was over, Haymitch got up and left the compartment without another word. As Haymitch had said, this Hunger Games would be difficult for him no matter where he was. One day, Katniss and Peeta watched Haymitch's Hunger Games highlights, and they were fooled by the Capitol's propaganda, not seeing the heroics, rebellious acts, and selflessness Haymitch displayed in the arena. The propaganda was not the only thing that formed their opinion of him though. Right when it started, Katniss immediately wondered in horror if Haymitch had killed Maisily, a statement that is tragic given that she was basically Haymitch's sister. This truly showed that the man he was today did not reflect the man he was back then. Snow had broken him so badly that even those closest to him did not see all the good that was inside of him. After they finished watching, Katniss said that Haymitch using the force field was like them eating the berries, and Haymitch walked in at that moment saying almost, but not quite. And as he did, he was drinking a bottle of wine, ending a stint of sobriety. Later on, Effie decided that all of them should have something gold to match Katniss's gold pin to show that they were a team, and she gave Haymitch a gold bracelet. During training, Haymitch told Peeta and Katniss to stay in love and to try and make friends. When Haymitch later listed the elite victors that wanted to team up with them, Katniss said she only wanted Mags, Beatty, and Wyrus. This made Haymitch say, "Of course you do." With Sunrise on the Reaping, this shows another exchange that's interesting. It's thought-provoking that the three people Katniss wanted to team up with were the three people that helped Haymitch before he went into the arena. When the day of the Hunger Games arrived, Haymitch said goodbye to Katniss and Peeta, and when Peeta asked for any last advice, Haymitch repeated the first advice he ever gave them: stay alive. He called Katniss back one more time though, and he told her, "You just remember who the real enemy is." This was Haymitch planting the seed that the tributes in the arena were not her enemy. The Capitol was. Haymitch immediately started planning with the rebels, which included half the tributes, just a few including Finnick, Joanna, Mags, Beatty, and Wyrus, plus a few others. He started by giving Finnick the gold bracelet Effie had given to him so that Katniss knew to trust him. He then told Joanna that Katniss originally wanted to team up with Beatty and Wyrus, meaning she should try to get them to gain Katniss's trust. And he worked with Plutarch to make sure everyone involved in the plan did whatever it took to keep Katniss as well as Peeta alive. As the third quarter Quell went on, Haymitch saw both of his former mentors die, Mags giving her life to save Katniss and Peeta just as the rebels planned, and Wyrus dying when Gloss snuck up on her. The plan of keeping Katniss and Peeta alive worked, but they hit a snag when they failed to get Peeta out of the arena. In their ship, while on their way to District 13, Katniss burst into a room with Haymitch, Finnick, and Plutarch while she was holding a syringe. After Haymitch wrestled it away from her, they explained everything about the rebellion. In that moment, Katniss realized that she was the Mockingjay, the face of the rebellion. Though Haymitch did not take on this role himself, he still had a gigantic part in creating what he himself could not do. Unfortunately, Haymitch had the task of telling Katniss that the capital got to Peeta before they did, and this made Katniss lunge at him, scratching him so hard that he had blood dripping down his face. They began screaming terrible things at each other, and it was all Haymitch could do to not rip her apart. Katniss felt betrayed by Haymitch, thinking that she and Peeta had been pawns in his game, a rebellion that he had made Katniss feel foolish for wanting to start. And to make things worse, she was told that Snow had bombed District 12, wiping out most of its population. When they arrived in District 13 and made permanent residence there, Haymitch had a terrible struggle because 13 strictly forbid any production or consumption of intoxicating beverages. This was the first time he was truly forced into sobriety with no secret stashes or home-brewed concoctions to ease his transition. The withdrawal got so bad that he was put in seclusion until he dried out, and he was not deemed fit for public display. He did not look good either. His skin was yellow, and he lost a significant amount of weight. He finally felt well enough to come out though, just in time to see what they had concocted for the first footage of the Mockingjay, and after witnessing Katniss's terrible performance, he said, "And that, my friends, is how a revolution dies." At this point, Katniss was still furious with Haymitch for everything that happened, so this did not help. Later though, Haymitch took it upon himself to invite everyone to a meeting, and he made them realize that they could not use footage of Katniss in a studio. They had to send her into the field. When the president of 13, President Quell, said it was too dangerous, Haymitch got her to agree when he said he would be in her ear the entire time. Just taking a look at this, I think it's poetic that Haymitch would be the one instructing the Mockingjay while she was in action. In a way, he was fulfilling what Plutarch had asked him to do 25 years ago through Katniss. After the meeting, Haymitch pulled Katniss aside and buried the hatchet, knowing that they would have to work together again. Haymitch added that he was still her mentor, and that meant that she had to do everything he told her to do while out in the field, to which she said, "We'll see." On their way to the mission, there's a moment that has a lot more meaning now that Sunrise on the Reaping came out, and that's a discussion between Haymitch and Plutarch. Before Haymitch's Hunger Games, the two of them had a deep conversation about certain books and ideas of the past, and here they have a conversation that is very reminiscent of that. We're going to form a republic where the people of each district and the capital can elect their own representatives to be their voice in a centralized government. Don't look so suspicious, it's worked before. In books, Haymitch mutters. In history books, says Plutarch. And if our ancestors could do it, then we can too. When they got to District 8, a bomb was dropped, and Haymitch said in Katniss's ear that she could not be spotted because their intelligence told them that the capital did not know she was there. When Katniss realized that the hospital was bombed though, Haymitch, sensing her thought process, told her not to go there, but she ripped the earpiece out, ending any communication Haymitch had with her. Haymitch's plan ended up working though, as they got some amazing footage of the Mockingjay. Watching the propo, Haymitch witnessed Katniss say, "Fire is catching," which was the same thing his former boss Hattie used to tell him years ago. Haymitch was finally painting his own poster, but with someone else's face. He was giving the capital a taste of their own medicine, reshaping the country's perception of them, just as they had done to him when he was 16. Katniss expected Haymitch to tell Quell about her ripping the earpiece out and disobeying orders, but Haymitch did not. When she realized this, Haymitch gave her a deadly smile that said, "Yeah, we wouldn't want to lose our little Mockingjay when she's finally begun to sing." In 13, they decided some of the District 12 survivors should go back to its ruins and film in the meadow. Haymitch was pitched to be among them, but he told Plutarch he couldn't face it. With Sunrise on the Reaping, the meaning of this becomes so much clearer. This meadow was where he met Lenore Dove, where she raised her geese, where she would sing to him, and where she died in his arms. Plutarch added, or corrected himself, telling Katniss that Haymitch couldn't face it without a bottle. Katniss rolled her eyes with impatience when she heard this, thinking he just wanted a day off. But we now see that she was oblivious to the hurt Haymitch was feeling that day. Though Haymitch wasn't there, he eventually saw the footage, and I'm sure it was startling to witness Katniss singing The Hanging Tree, the song that Lenore Dove used to serenade him with in that exact same location in the meadow. I'm sure Haymitch put together that Burdock had passed that song down to his daughter. When it became clear that every rebellious move Katniss made would result in Peeta being tortured by Snow, she lost it. Haymitch was the only person who was truly able to comfort her because she knew that he too loved Peeta. As she cried and screamed, Haymitch pulled her in tighter, and eventually they decided to sedate her. Haymitch and the other rebel leaders came to the conclusion that Katniss wouldn't be able to be the Mockingjay if she knew that her every move would result in Peeta being harmed. So, they decided that the only thing they could do was rescue him. As they began the mission, Haymitch sat by Katniss's bedside, his eyes red from both staying awake for so long and possibly from crying. When Katniss woke up, he squeezed her shoulder and told her that they were getting Peeta out. This was terrifying though, because Katniss knew she could lose both Peeta and Gale, who was part of the rescue team. Haymitch asked Katniss if she wanted them to sedate her until it was over, and Katniss immediately took note of this. Sedation was his coping mechanism, and she began to wonder if he had lost friends, family, or even a loved one, and where they were now. She wondered why he had nobody in his life until she and Peeta came along. Little did Katniss know, yes, he had lost his best friend, who was her father. He had lost his family, where the ruins of 12 now lay, and he had lost his love in the very meadow Katniss was just a few weeks ago. Katniss begged Haymitch to let her help get Peeta back and protect Gale in some way, so Haymitch and Plutarch decided that she and Finnick could film a propo to divert everyone in the capital, including Snow. When Plutarch asked Finnick to reveal how Snow had subjected him to prostitution, Haymitch became visibly unhappy with Plutarch for asking this of Finnick, and when Finnick agreed to do it, Haymitch told him that he didn't have to. Haymitch's reaction to this could be 1, resentment toward Plutarch for making him do things for the camera, or 2, because Finnick was doing what he never could, admitting what Snow had done to him. This was the scariest thing in the world for Haymitch. He had kept quiet, drowned himself in alcohol, ensuring he never had to think about it, much less share it with the entire country. As Haymitch and Katniss watched Finnick film, Katniss asked Haymitch if that was what Snow did to him. He told her no. Instead, Snow had his mother, younger brother, and girl killed 2 weeks after he was crowned victor because of his actions in the arena. When Katniss questioned why Snow didn't just kill him, Haymitch immediately had the answer. He said that Snow kept him alive so that all the young Finnicks, Joannas, and Cashmeres would see what happened to a victor who caused problems. Katniss then voiced that Snow couldn't go after anyone else to hurt Haymitch until she and Peeta came along. And she was right. He had let them in more than anybody else since he was 16 years old. The mission turned out to be a success, and Peeta, along with Joanna Mason and Annie Cresto, were saved from the Capitol. Haymitch watched Finnick and Annie run to each other, finally reunited, which I'm sure caused Haymitch pain, knowing that Lenore Dove would never return to him. He would never be able to hold her the way Finnick was holding Annie. When Haymitch and Katniss went to see Peeta, the two grinned at each other, realizing that they had finally done what they had set out to do, to save Peeta. However, this reunion went terribly wrong when Peeta strangled Katniss nearly to death. Haymitch was so shocked that he froze, and though he was the closest to her, it was Boggs that had to knock Peeta out. Katniss noted that it was a rare thing to catch both herself and Haymitch off guard. It became clear that Peeta had been hijacked by the Capitol on President Snow's orders. They had used Trackerjacker venom to warp his mind and change his perception of Katniss. This probably brought Haymitch back to Luella McCoy. She too had sort of been returned to him in a way that he did not expect, and she too had been drugged by something just like Peeta. The similarities between himself and Katniss's experience just keep adding up. Haymitch helped in bringing Peeta back though, but Katniss had to leave because it was too painful. When Katniss was out in the field, Haymitch kept her updated on Peeta's progress. Whenever Katniss was going into action, Haymitch was always there in her ear, and one day he asked her to make a speech to announce that they had all but taken over District 2. Haymitch planned to feed her the speech line by line, but she was interrupted by a fresh battle breaking out. Katniss stepped up like the Mockingjay Haymitch had helped her become, and he let her do her thing. but when she got a gun pointed at her, Haymitch whispered the line he had said to her before the third quarter Quell: "Who is the enemy?" Haymitch then heard her get shot moments later, which I'm sure was terrible for him. He might have thought it was Luella or Mesa Lee or Lenore Dove all over again. Luckily, Katniss was rushed to the District 13 hospital and was okay. Haymitch continued to track Peeta's progress, and eventually, Peeta was well enough to speak to Haymitch. He didn't freak out, but he did get mad at Haymitch for what he said were all the right reasons, like not telling him about the rebel plot. When the topic of Katniss came up, Peeta told Haymitch that he wanted to see her. At Annie and Finnick's wedding, Haymitch pulled Katniss aside and told her that Peeta was doing better, but was still unpredictable. He then mentioned his visit with Peeta and how he asked to see her. When the two of them came face to face, Haymitch was once again in Katniss's ear, but he let them talk. When it ended in Katniss leaving upset, he did not try to stop her. I'm sure it was hard for Haymitch to see the two people that brought him out of his darkness not be the same people he had grown to care for so much. When a task force was being put together with several past victors, Katniss asked Haymitch along with Beetee if they were going on the mission, and Haymitch joked saying they only wanted young and attractive victors, seeing as they were filming. Haymitch became skeptical of President Coin when she sent Peeta to join Katniss's squad in the Capitol, and he knew that she was sending him there hoping that he would kill Katniss. When Katniss called Peeta a mutt and said it would be easy to shoot him right to his face, Haymitch had to get on the line and talk some sense into her. He made her realize that it wasn't Peeta's fault that he was the way he was. It was the Capitol's fault, which harps back to the words they've shared a few times now: remember who the real enemy is. He then made her think about how Peeta would be treating her if their roles were reversed and Katniss was the one who was hijacked, and this really opened Katniss's eyes. Haymitch then referenced the deal he and Katniss made to save Peeta. The rebels eventually became victorious, overthrowing Snow in the Capitol. It came at a price though. Prim was killed right in front of Katniss, and Katniss was badly hurt. Astrid, their mother, was unable to bear this loss and decided to throw herself into her work. This left Haymitch to take on a fatherly role for Katniss, making sure she was alright and well cared for. This was not an easy job because she did not speak a word and constantly went where she wasn't supposed to be in Snow's mansion, leading to Haymitch being called in to take her back. One day, Haymitch brought Katniss the news that Snow had been tried, found guilty, and was sentenced to execution, which she, the Mockingjay, would carry out. But Katniss still didn't speak a word. When Haymitch heard that Coin was going to execute Effie, he and Plutarch fought hard to ensure that did not happen. The three of them had started this journey together 25 years earlier when they all represented District 12 in some way for the 50th Hunger Games, and Haymitch was not going to let anything happen to her, especially after Effie was there for him during his struggles. Despite taking on this father figure role for Katniss, Haymitch still fell into his old ways, being wasted a lot of the time. One day when Katniss woke him up by throwing water on him, an old pastime for the two at this point, he lashed at her with the knife he slept with. Katniss noted that the end of Snow's reign still did not end Haymitch's terrors and nightmares. Haymitch immediately commented on the fact that the Mockingjay had gotten her voice back. When Katniss asked for his help, he asked her if it was more boy trouble, making her storm out very upset. Haymitch regretted this immediately, and he called after her, but he was too drunk to be able to follow her. The next day though, the day of Snow's execution, a hungover Haymitch brought Katniss food and pills. Before the execution, Haymitch was invited to a meeting with all of the other surviving victors. There, Coin presented the idea of a final Hunger Games, but with the Capitol's children. In the end, the vote came down to Haymitch and Katniss, and in this moment, we truly saw how alike they were. Haymitch showed that he fully understood Katniss and what she wanted, and he voted yes alongside her, saying he was with the Mockingjay. This is interesting because Haymitch voting yes did the opposite of what he promised Lenore Dove, to stop the sunrise on the Reaping. As fate would have it though, while Haymitch based that decision on caring for Katniss ended up making his promise to his love stay possible, as she killed President Coin instead of President Snow. Haymitch still got to witness the death of the man that killed all of his loved ones, as he was mobbed by the crowd and was either beaten to death or choked on his own blood. Haymitch was heavily involved in Katniss's trial, as he and Plutarch painted her as a hopeless, shell-shocked lunatic, an angle that allowed her to go free if she was confined to District 12. Following the trial, Haymitch picked her up from where she was being held and told her that they were going home. When Astrid could not return to 12 because it was too painful, Haymitch once again stepped up and he became Katniss's legal guardian. Before leaving though, he went to Astrid and she gave him a letter to pass on to Katniss, which he of course did. Neither Haymitch nor Katniss really thought of Haymitch as Katniss's father, but rather her mentor. During their journey home, Haymitch searched every inch of the ship, collecting all the alcohol he could find to bring back down to District 12. Eventually, a healed Peeta arrived in 12, reuniting the three of them, Haymitch's family. Haymitch thought long and hard about how similar he was to Katniss, which Peeta had always pointed out. However, Haymitch noted that Katniss was smarter than him and perhaps luckier. In the end, she had finished the job that Haymitch had started. Katniss and Peeta started a memorial book for all of those that had died, and at first, Haymitch had no interest in joining in. However, when Burdock's page popped up, Haymitch had to add the fact that he had shown him Lenore Dove's grave. He then felt compelled to write about Maceley, his younger brother Sid, and eventually they all came tumbling out. His family, his friends, the 23 years of tributes he had mentored, his comrades in arms, and eventually his girl Lenore Dove. He finally told their story, the story he had spent years trying to forget. Haymitch was closer to her than he had ever been since her death. He had finally fulfilled his promise to her. He had stopped the sunrise on the reaping. There were no more Hunger Games, and he played a major part in that. After Katniss had read their story, she brought him a basket of geese eggs, and Haymitch soon began raising them, just as Lenore Dove had. With the help of Peeta, they ensured that the first thing the geese saw was Haymitch, giving him the same bond Lenore Dove had with her geese. Haymitch didn't know how much longer he would live. His liver was wrecked from all the drinking, but on the bright side, he drank differently these days. He didn't drink to forget, but just out of habit. He thought to himself though that when his time came, it would come. He soon realized that Lenore Dove had been with him his whole life. Instead of being in his nightmares, now she no longer came to him angry or dying. She had grown old with him, her face etched with fine lines, her hair touched with gray the same as his. They had lived full lives together, and just like their geese, they had mated for life. The capital had never truly taken her from Haymitch. As Lenore Dove said, "Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping," and she was the most precious thing Haymitch had ever known. When he told her that, she would always respond, "I love you like all fire," and he would reply, "I love you like all fire too."